After a decade of leading the Idaho National Lab, Director John Grossenbacher is retiring. He gave his swan song, so to speak, at the Idaho Falls City Club today. Karole Honas was there and interviewed him at length after his presentation. He told her the future of the site is bright, but he would have liked to solve the issue of research fuel not being allowed into the lab because of that 1995 cleanup agreement with the DOE. Here's that interview.
Hey, what do you think, as you're leaving, what's the future of the INL?
Well, I think the future of the lab is very exciting, it's very bright, and we ought to be very optimistic about it. I think that the mission areas, the areas where the lab does research, nuclear energy, national homeland security, energy and environmental work, you know, how do we make new nuclear fuels cheaper, better, faster, and better performing and more safe? How do we protect our infrastructures, you know, our sewer systems, water systems, electrical distribution systems from cyber attack, which is, you know, increasingly a new way of war? What can we do to clean up industrial wastewater? What can we do to make industrial manufacturing processes that are net zero in terms of water use? What can we do with agricultural products that today are waste, but we can make fuel out of them? And the lab is engaged in all those things. There's an important need for science and engineering folk to focus on those kinds of challenges and opportunities, so I think it's a very exciting future. When I reduce it to dollars and people, because that's usually where people ask me about that, today the lab's about a $900 million business. It's about 3,800 people. I think 10 years from now, it's not unrealistic at all. In fact, I think it's a very pragmatic expectation that the lab would be $2 billion and maybe 5,000 people. So I expect growth, and I expect a bright and important future for the lab.
Do you regret at all that you're having to leave amidst a little bit of controversy?
No. I mean, you know, these things happen. They're not. Some things are in control of the laboratory. Some are not. My concern is that all dimensions of this controversy get addressed in an objective and public way as they can. And as I said at the City Club presentation today, the current path we're on, which is denying the laboratory the ability to bring in 200 pounds of used commercial fuel because of a missed settlement agreement milestone, is both inappropriate and it's damaging.
Let me just explain for our viewers, make sure that they understand that in 1995 there was an agreement made with the Department of Energy that the site would get cleaned up because it hadn't been addressed well prior to that. And those are two very popular governors that have stood behind that agreement, Cecil Anderson, Phil Batt. So where we are now is there's still 900,000 gallons of waste on the INL site that was supposed to be cleaned up by now, supposed to be out of there by now, and they haven't quite met that deadline.
Well, it's supposed to be solidified, Carol. I mean, it'd still be here. It'd be sitting here as a solid because, yeah, the only place to dispose of it is a repository, which we don't have yet.
Right.
But, you know, the risks associated with managing the risks associated with a solid are simpler than a liquid. Yeah. Right. So it's it was an appropriate milestone, and getting that waste solidified is important.
But they're kind of holding something else hostage. The state is. These are your words, you know, that I've heard. You believe that you need these 200 pounds of nuclear research fuel. Am I right on that? And they will not let that come in until the 900,000 gallons is solidified, or at least the process is started. Okay, so that's kind of the background on what this controversy is. Why do you need 200 pounds of research fuel so badly?
Well, because there's important work that needs to be done on the safety of commercial used nuclear fuel in dry storage. And we don't have any fuel like that. I mean, we can simulate it, we can try to make it, but you need the real material from real commercial power reactors. So from the safety perspective, and the safety work is related to that, the work that would help prevent the spread of nuclear weapons deals with a way of processing waste that we do here, that other people around the world are very interested in, and we've got to figure out what kind of controls we want to have internationally on this work so that we're sure that we don't create an opportunity for people to cheat and take materials that you can make a bomb out of and somehow produce them in this process, hide them, and then before you know it, somebody else has a nuclear weapon. So that's very, very important work. This is the nation's lead laboratory for nuclear energy. It's what we do, what we specialize in, what we have facilities and people. And now this position, this linkage of a cleanup milestone and the laboratory's work is preventing us from doing that valuable work. Now, The work itself is one thing. What I also worry about is it damages the lab. It damages our reputation. It makes it harder for us to recruit because critical scientists and engineers, they've got to be in a place not only where there are facilities and tools and colleagues, but they've got to have the material to work on. And it raises the question as well, is Idaho supportive of the lab's nuclear mission when they won't allow the lab to bring in the materials it needs to perform its mission? So it's a recruiting issue. It also, I worry about it a lot relative to the federal government's actions and how it funds the, what I call the nuclear research enterprise in our country, which includes a lot of universities, other laboratories, and we have competitors among those people. And now this allows them to say, you sure you want to build that new building in Idaho? You know, you know, if nothing else, just the uncertainty of whether or not the state supports the lab's mission is it's damaging. There's no other way to describe it.
Are you angry at the Attorney General's interpretation?
Well, it's not personal. I mean, I know Attorney General Lawson, and I have enormous respect for him, both personally and professionally. But I strongly disagree with the position that he's taken, and I think this issue, the key issue is, should the lab and cleanup progress be linked? I think that needs to be addressed now on this particular issue, and I'll just give you, one example of why this is important. When the settlement agreement was written, there was an expectation that we would have Yucca Mountain by 2035.
Right.
And so there's settlement agreement milestones tied to 2035. They're not going to be met. You know, the
So
plan
the agreement
DOE...
is already somewhat...
Well, it needs to, it could, no, I think it's still a very important, a very powerful tool that enables a good relationship between the federal government and the state. But it's not perfect, and as things change, I think, we ought to look at it and say, how can we make it better? How can we make it better protect the people of the state, the interests of the state of Idaho, and fulfill the interests of, the federal government as well?
So renegotiate the 95 agreement?
Well, I think renegotiate is a strong word because it creates this picture of let's start with a clean sheet of paper, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think some modification in the future is essential and in the best interest of the state. So for example, the 2035 deadline will drive DOE because they have to comply with engaging and spending money and conducting activities today that really aren't relevant until we have a repository. And the DOE plan for a repository says the earliest we're going to get one is 2048. Why don't we defer some of those things that really aren't going to be relevant for 13 years beyond the deadlines in the settlement agreement, and instead speed up some other things, other activities that will go on, but they'll go on at a slower pace, and speeding them up makes the environment even safer. And my examples of those is let's save that money that we spend on, again, on meeting 2035 deadlines and get the buried waste out of the ground, the liquid waste out of the tanks. I don't really think that's a money issue at this stage, but get the buried waste out of the ground, liquid waste out of the tanks, and get caps installed on the areas where we had contamination in the ground. The bulk of it has been unearthed and disposed of, but you can't find every atom, and there's going to be residual contamination, and these caps would prevent it from migrating over decades. So why not get that done faster? Then the people and the environment are better off. The truth is, things like getting the dry stored used nuclear fuel that's out here, getting it packaged and ready to go to meet a 2035 deadline, when we know we're going to have no place to ship it, at least until 2048, John Grossenbacher's opinion, that is not in the best interest of the people of Idaho or the best use of taxpayers' dollars. And the other thing that's important context in this is the INL site is not the only cleanup activity that DOE has to concern itself with. In point of fact, relative to others, relative to Washington State, Savannah River, even places, Tennessee, there are bigger cleanup budgets and there are higher priorities because, a fair assessment.
But only so many dollars.
Yeah, the environmental risk is greater. So why not take advantage of the current opportunity of a good relationship between the federal government and the state to adjust things, to modify things? Yeah, yeah. And I'd be remiss if I didn't add that I think another important dimension of this is Idaho is fortunate to have Congressman Simpson as the chairman of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee. Every DOE appropriation has to pass over Congressman Simpson's desk. And you know, he's a good public official. He doesn't say everything needs to come to Idaho. But the way government works, and this is not bad, this is the way it is, that means people think about, is there anything in our bill relative to Idaho? They think about Idaho, and I'll say it this way, I think the congressman has a certain convening authority that gives the state a strong position. So shame on us if we don't, I think, take advantage of this opportunity to improve.
Bring that 200 pounds in. What's
Yeah.
200 pounds look like? Does it come in on a big railroad car?
No, it'll come in on a truck because it's radioactive and you have to shield it, but when you get the radioactive material together, it's 2 5-gallon buckets.
That's all we're talking about.
That's all we're talking about. Now, you know, let's be fair. I mean, this is highly radioactive stuff. You don't just carry around a bucket of load of this stuff. But
To visualize.
yeah,
That's
it's
what
not
it
a
is.
big amount. And you know, the work we do is in facilities like our hot cells that have concrete floors and walls that are 4 feet thick.
We
you know,
can handle it safely.
That's right.
I'm okay. I live in eastern Idaho, on the aquifer. My site is safe.
Absolutely. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't safe.
Grossenbacher told Karole he's now looking for a new job. Meanwhile, the next City Club meeting hosts Idaho Attorney General Lawrence Wasden, and he will respond to the issue of upholding the 1995 cleanup agreement and not letting any more research fuel in until the waste is taken care of.